Chapter 2. Doughnut Economy and Climate Change. 2.1 What is the relationship between the doughnut economy and climate change? One assumption that no one seems to be questioning is that growth can and should continue as usual and without limits. Economic anthropologist Jason Hickel says that the prevailing belief that GDP must always continue growing, regardless of the level of wealth the country already has, 2020, is astonishing. He compares it to a new definition of absurdity and reminds us that in nature such rapid, uncontrolled and unlimited growth only occurs with cancer cells, which replicate just for the sake of replication, and have deadly results for all systems of the body. It is difficult to find a more illustrative, and at the same time devastating, comparison. Lucy Jones goes even further. She reminds us that inflammation in the human body, as an urgent response to a relatively short-lived damaging factor, is a natural and healing mechanism. However, it is only when it is sustained over time, when it becomes a chronic response to prolonged and cumulative damage, that we talk about an inflammation whose effects are purely detrimental. Why have we not been able to address this issue in time? Many point to our short-termism. The long duration that characterizes ecological time is opposed to the short term in which political life develops, not to mention the instantaneous character of commercial time. Unfortunately, far from this kind of social and environmental responsibility, a term which, ironically enough, many companies nowadays use as a way of carrying out their image washing strategies, especially the greenwashing, we live in a short-sighted plutocracy. It has been many years since the problems of environmental protection ceased to be the exclusive domain of environmentalists, and began to encompass social and economic issues. It can be demonstrated with the example of the interdisciplinary concept of sustainable development, already formulated as early as in the 1980s, Brundtland, 1987, which is based on the triple formula, often illustrated by the triangle that brings together at the same level economic, ecological, and social issues. This idea made it possible to undertake extensive research, as well as to seek specific solutions to the problems presented at the Conference of Rio de Janeiro in 1992, and at the subsequent Earth Summits. Among these problems, the following deserve special attention: the differences in the distribution of goods between social groups and countries, the decline of biodiversity, the shrinking of agricultural areas, the reduction of freshwater resources, the rise of sea levels and its increasing pollution. However, despite these first steps towards the incorporation of environmental issues into social and economic debates, it is now being recognized that the expression sustainable development is both a pleonasm in definition and an oxymoron in content. It is a pleonasm because development means self-sustaining growth, and it is an oxymoron because development is neither sustainable nor self-sustaining. We are beginning to glimpse the beginning of the depletion of energy and material resources, as well as the first effects of climate change and biodiversity loss. In this context, maintaining capitalism's spiral of production and consumption will only accelerate the systemic crisis. But it is not only the biosphere that is in deep crisis, but also global capitalism, which is already reaching its limits. In this section, firstly, we will review the background of the, unfortunately still unrecognized, emergency situation. Where do we come from? Then, we will review the present state, who are we? Or, Homo economicus, to which the models of production and consumerism have led us, in the last decades. Finally, we will make some final reflections about the possible path to be taken, although it might not exist yet, since, as the poet Machado said, the way is made by walking. From the perspective of the economy of the doughnut, where are we going? 2.2 Where are we? The Anthropocene. Civilization is currently overstepping a number of critical planetary boundaries, and faces a multidimensional crisis of biological decay, including dangerous climate change, ocean acidification, deforestation, and biodiversity collapse. We are approaching no-return points, the famous tipping points, that impose risks to the conditions that sustain human life and the life of other species on Earth. This crisis is not being caused solely by humans per se, but rather by the economic system based on perpetual expansion, for the disproportionate benefit of a small minority of the richest. As the anthropologist, engineer, professor, and environmental activist yoUTh Herrero says, unveiling the fallacy of continuous growth on a planet with limits has been at the core of environmentalism for decades. According to Serge Latouche, the notion of physical limits to economic growth probably dates back to the 18th century, with Malthus, But it was only with C.D. Carnot and his second law of thermodynamics, 1824, that it acquired a scientific basis. Why? Energy transformations, in different forms, heat, movement, etc., cannot be completely reversed, and we are confronted with the phenomenon of entropy. The clash of industrial expansions versus the biophysical limits of the planet started to seriously question the universal model of unlimited growth, and remained present especially in the second half of the 20th century, the era that is nowadays often considered as the rise of the Anthropocene. What is it all about? The Anthropocene is a concept coined in the 1990s, with the intention of drawing attention to the exaggeration and the great impact of human activity on the biosphere. The International Union of Geological Sciences proposed the concept of the Anthropocene as an indicator that humanity had become a force capable of restructuring the planet in geomorphological terms. This phase is understood as the new era that comes to replace the Holocene, the current period in Earth's geological history, that began 11,700 years ago. The term is attributed to the American biologist Eugene F. Stormer, and its popularization to the Dutch Nobel laureate Paul Crutzen, since both scientists proved that the alterations of the relative equilibrium in which the Earth system had been maintained until now were indeed caused by human activity. They also marked the symbolic beginning of this era in the year 1784, when the steam engine of the British James Watt gave rise to the Industrial Revolution and to the overuse of fossil resources. UNESCO, 2018. In its short existence, today the term is already used in hundreds of articles and by scientists all over the world. Fernando Voladores, research professor at the CSIC and the Universidad Rey Juan Carlos, confirms, the stubborn reality of scientific data reveals that, for some decades now, we have been the protagonists of a whole new geological era, the Anthropocene. This era, functionally and stratigraphically distinct from the Holocene, is characterized by an unmistakable imprint of human activity on the planet, which we are subjecting not only to rapid climate change, but to a whole series of large-scale environmental changes. We have transformed all the major biogeochemical cycles, starting with water and ending with nitrogen and phosphorus. We have caused plastic fragments to litter the sands of every beach in the world and accumulate to form gigantic floating islands in the oceans. We are responsible for more than a third of the earthquakes and tremors on the planet. We have affected the tilt angle of the Earth's rotation axis. We are already the planet's primary geomorphological agent, moving more soil and sediment than any natural process. Welcome, then, to the Anthropocene. Still, there are those who propose, and not without reason, to replace the etymology of anthropos, that is the human being in general, by other denominations such as Occidentalocene, because of the major impact caused by the inhabitants of the global north, UNESCO, 2018, or Capitalocene, referring directly to the economic system as the major cause of the crisis. This term was co-created by Jason Moore, American sociologist and environmental historian, and Andreas Malm, writer and professor of human ecology from Sweden. However, it does not just mean a new economic piece in the geological mosaic, rather, it points to capitalism as a system of exploitation, a global ecology of capital, power, and reproduction situated and multi-species. Parikh, 2019, pointing the finger at the culprit even more precisely, even speaks of the Grotthocene. What is more, the Venezuelan research and action group La Dental Las Canta even proposed the Patriarchocene as a point of convergence between the natural and social sciences, to reaffirm, from an ecofeminist point of view, that the domination and exploitation of nature and the domination and exploitation of women represent the two sides of the same coin. The same movement points here also against the historically privileged role of the white, bourgeois, male and wealthy man. The biologist and philosopher of science Donna Haraway, in conclusion, also proposed the Thulucene, a new utopia of interspecies alliance, to unite forces and rebuild refuges, to make possible a partial and solid biological, cultural, political, technological recovery and recomposition, that must include mourning for the irreversible losses. Etymologically, Haraway took the Greek word chthon, meaning earth, and attempted to decenter the attention from human activity, in order to pursue change. Rosoro, 2018, 41. Going back to the Anthropocene period, scientists have highlighted the onset of the Great Acceleration period around 1950, and they have characterized it, above all, by high carbon concentration levels, elevated to over 400 parts per million, well above the 350 parts per million considered safe for terrestrial life. In fact, the 1950 date represents a breakthrough, which is best expressed through the shared graph that illustrates the abrupt change and abrupt break with the levels experienced until then, and its never seen before subsequent acceleration. Since then, biodiversity loss, environmental pollution, climate change and the loss of natural resources have accelerated simultaneously. And, of course, researchers and institutions link this fact closely to our economic activity and growth. Given that growth is degrading nature and exacerbates social inequalities, it is only natural that the other approach, as that of the doughnut, comes to the rescue. 2.3 Why is it a climate emergency and not climate change? As Emerito Bono reminds us, the first Club of Rome report in 1972, the famous document, The Limits to Growth, mentioned above, which was followed by others and culminated in the Club of Rome report 30 years later, sounded an alarm about such overreach. In the words of the authors of the report, the human socio-economic system, as currently structured, is unmanageable, has overstepped its limits and is headed for collapse. In fact, since 2006, global conventional oil extraction capacity has stagnated. International Energy Agency, 2015, and it is possible that in 2015 we will have reached the famous peak oil, the peak of extraction of all fuels. According to the most optimistic studies, this will happen in 2024. This phenomenon is also known as the Hubbert curve, the scientist who printed the term peak oil decades ago. But this is not the only planetary boundary we have already crossed. As biologist Pablo Servin reminds us, in terms of available space on Earth, we have 51 million hectares, of which the usable land for humans is around 12 million hectares. In a theoretical exercise of dividing this by the world's population today, we come out at approximately 1.8 hectares per person. However, taking into account the high demand for energy and raw materials, the area required to absorb the waste obtained during various production and consumption processes, plus the impact of the infrastructure needed to maintain the standard of living developed countries lead today, it has been calculated that each individual consumes an average of 2.2 hectares of this bioproductive space. And that is assuming that demographically the population level remains stable, which we already know is not happening. That is, we are already living on credit. Moreover, the average footprint is not even an accurate measure, let alone a fair one, as it hides some very alarming disparities. For example, a US citizen consumes 9.6 hectares, a Canadian 7.2, a European 4.5, a French 5.26 and an Italian 3.8. If everyone had the same lifestyle as the French, we would need 3 planets to sustain it, while if we follow the example of the Americans, we would need 6. In short, we have limited supplies of soils, minerals, and fossil fuels, and the planet's capacity for bioregeneration is extremely low in the face of the impacts of human activity today. As a result, our economic hypergrowth is reaching the limits of the planet's finite resources. Already in 2006, the World Wildlife Fund announced that the Earth's capacity to regenerate its biosphere could no longer meet the growing demand. Humans are converting resources into waste, faster than nature can transform waste into new resources. A more recent WWF report also highlights that scientists have long been warning that we are already experiencing an unprecedented loss of biodiversity. This phenomenon is being called the 6th mass extinction, the first since the disappearance of the dinosaurs and the first due to human activity. This is because the rate of species extinction over the last century is 100 times higher than the natural rate. Moreover, beyond the problem with biodiversity, a phenomenon that studies anticipate to continue, on top of that, it is also expected a rise in temperatures of up to 5 degrees Celsius by the end of the century. This would make it impossible for society, as we know it, to function and would mean a shortage of basic resources, including drinking water and food. If we listen to scientists' warnings about the scarcity of natural resources and the associated energy crisis, such a rise in temperature could provoke a context of crisis and an even more exacerbated struggle for basic resources between individuals, countries, and regions. In other words, 5 degrees is the difference between our time and the last glacial period, when a significant part of our continent was covered by a huge ice sheet. Therefore, it is not hard to imagine that the world will look completely different in the coming decades, but in the opposite direction. As Pablo Servin recently highlighted, there are indeed 4 facts that should be beyond dispute. 1. The physical growth of our societies is going to stop in the near future. 2. We have irreversibly altered the entire planetary system. 3. We are entering a highly unstable future, in which major disruptions will be the norm, and 4. We may now be subject to potential global systemic collapses. For all the above reasons, we live in a time of climate emergency, yet our collective actions do not yet reflect this in the slightest. We do not act yet as if we are really facing an urgent, potentially life-threatening emergency. How serious is the situation? According to Sir David Attenborough, one of the world's best-known environmental communicators, it may sound frightening, but the scientific evidence is that, if we have not taken dramatic action over the next decade, we could face the irreversible damage to the natural world and the collapse of our societies. Answering the headline question, what have we done? Canadian writer Naomi Klein openly says that we have done absolutely nothing to avoid reaching the crisis we are in, because of our failure to confront visceral capitalism and its imperative to grow or die. 2. For the role of the social economy. In the face of unbridled growth and the dangers of climate change, as Frederick Jameson pointed out, it sometimes seems easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of the current modus operandi, the famous business as usual, of capitalism. While there are movements seeking socio-ecological transformation, relying on technological innovation and global markets to solve the challenges is a dangerous illusion. Proponents of the paradigm shift argue that it will take industrialized countries to find ways to transcend their expansion. In this time of crisis, which is only going to get worse, we face the urgent need to change the way we manage our life projects, and it will obviously also be necessary to change the way we look at the economy. The social economy, which has historically played a secondary role, is therefore called upon to confirm whether it is possible for it to be a vector for these changes, another ally. Especially since Polanyi pointed out that the market economy has separated itself from society, becoming independent from it, even harmful, and climate change will increase the level of activity of the entities in this sector. As highlighted above, the concept of economy is derived from the Greek term oikonomos, which meant household administration, oikos, household, and meaN, administration. However, when, and above all, how did we come to think of an autonomous system called economy? According to anthropologist Timothy Mitch, surprisingly not long ago. Before 1940, economics referred primarily to economizing. Even in today's Greek, the word economics still retains this double meaning of a system and of the act of managing savings. The concept of social economy, contrary to appearances, is not a new vision, as its origins go back to the end of the 19th century, although the first wave of interest in such a vision of the socio-economic order took place at the beginning of the 20th century, especially during the interwar period. Already at that time, advocates of this idea saw that a booming capitalist market economy could not take care of the needs of all citizens. The state institutions of the time were also unable or unwilling to meet social expectations. Consequently, the need for a management that pays more attention to human needs, without profit or short-term political interests, began to be emphasized. Nowadays, we are facing what is known as the second wave of the social economy, as criticism of the other sectors, private and public, has not diminished. Though neither have the needs. Hence, the third sector has the opportunity to become an even more important actor than it is today, especially considering the postulates of the Doughnut economy, with which it has many points in common. One of the main effects of this critical process has been a considerable increase in the general interest in alternative economic models. Apart from the economy of the Doughnut, we have the economy of the common good by Christian Felber, 2010, the civil economy by Luigino Bruni and Stefano Zamagni, 2007, or the social economy in its multiple expressions. It is no coincidence that Elinor Ostrom was awarded the Nobel Prize in Economics in 2009, for her work on the governance of the commons, where she highlights the fundamental role of institutions and collective action processes in its efficiency and sustainability. In the same way, Muhammad Yunus won the Nobel Peace Prize in 2006 for his search about a fairer economy, through the theoretical and practical development of microcredits and their implementation in various regions of the world. The concept of social economy is quite broad. It combines social and economic objectives, but in its DNA it always carries an organization that serves human beings and is not directed against them. The primacy of ethics in its management is in the foreground, so its key principle is to act for the benefit of people. At the European level, the Social Economy Europe body envisages the following characteristics of the social economy, as set out in the Charter of Principles of the Social Economy from 2002. The primacy of the person and of the social object over the capital. Voluntary and open membership. Democratic control by its members. Conjunction of members' interests and the general interest. Defense and application of the principles of solidarity and responsibility. Autonomy of management and independence from the public authorities. Destination of the majority of surpluses to the achievement of objectives in favor of sustainable development, the improvement of services to members and the general interest. Why can and should the social economy be an important link in the eco-transition and the donut economy? Using Solusterwitz's analysis, there are 4 basic functions of the social economy. 1. Generating new jobs, especially for people at risk of social exclusion, providing services in the field of vocational guidance and training, internships, etc., and facilitating the entry into the labor market of the most disadvantaged. 2. Alleviating the tensions and imperfections in the gap left between the market on the one hand and the welfare state on the other, by focusing on the provision of social services for individuals and local communities, especially where neither the state nor the market can meet their needs. 3. Mobilizing and multiplying social capital. 4. Using their mechanisms of participation and democratic management, especially required in cooperatives. They are a kind of school of democracy. The book Degrowth in Movements recognizes that working in an economy to meet people's needs, rather than to maximize profits, is in line with the core idea of the social or solidarity economy, cooperation rather than competition and an emphasis on well-being rather than profit. Specifically, the following characteristics of the social or solidarity economy make it able to play such a crucial role. Systems of self-government and democratically made decisions. Increased internal and external collaboration. Focus on achieving the common good. Inclusion of minorities and other disadvantaged groups. Non-discriminatory policies. Greater transparency and inclusiveness of education and long-term process orientation. Interest in the protection of ecosystems and biodiversity, as the basis of people's existence and well-being. Understanding the economy as one of the subsystems of ecology, which means that the economy must fit into natural environmental cycles and not exceed their limits. Along the same lines, Setien and Acosta point to the following meta-reference that are present in the sphere of the third sector entities. 1. The value of human life and the planet. 2. The value of freedom and democracy. 3. The value of equality and plurality, and 4. The value of solidarity and equity in producing and sharing. The capital and those who manage and support it tell us that we need to produce more and in less time. This has nothing to do with human needs. People do not need more cars, more guns, more houses, more high-speed trains, more airports. We need to reverse the terms, so that wage labor is no longer at the center of our lives. Putting human needs at the center inevitably leads us to produce only what is necessary and with an eye to sustaining the life around us. Within this system there is no solution. But we have alternatives. 1. Putting well-being and life at the center from a feminist perspective. 2. Less materials and less energy for better living. 3. Reconceptualize, rethink and redistribute jobs. 4. Radical distribution of wealth. 5. Individual and collective changes for transition. 6. Bring policy closer, to be part of the solution, Prats et al., 2017, 94. In a housing cooperative, the landlord and the tenant become one. In a worker cooperative, the worker and the boss become one. And in consumer cooperative projects, the consumer and the producer are often one and the same. Callies reminds us that, beneath the surface, there is a wealth of alternatives, associations, social centers, alternative markets such as fair trade or non-traditional market exchanges, barter, donations, etc., voluntary networks and mutual care. Bordera highlights the movement of transition networks, integral cooperatives, consumer groups, eco-villages or repopulated villages, are some examples of change towards a more responsible consumption of those finite resources that we are squandering. Gibson Graham visualizes this fact in the form of an iceberg. At the visible top is the money-valued market and traditional economy. Below the surface, there is all the invisible work done by women and caregivers, volunteers, cooperative members, etc. If we focus our attention on the capitalist economy, on the top of the iceberg, ignoring the diversity of economies that already exist and factors that underpin it, then we reify capitalism and help reproduce it, Gibson Graham argued. In the same line, he highlights the need to anticipate initiatives in the face of the global climate crisis and proposes to organize ourselves, and implement them now, to try to prevent it. How? Through a wide range of proposals, such as the encouragement of simpler ways of life, greater local or regional self-sufficiency, cooperation and solidarity networks between communities, the importance of the hinterland, surrounding area itself, the communitization of care at the local level or direct and community-based democratic systems. Moreover, as Chomsky points out, organized systems of power, whether state or private, are not taking sufficient action to address the looming crisis. Unless they are pressured by activism and the work of the third sector, they will not. And much of this work is linked to education and awareness raising about the state of nature and the magnitude of the problems we face, as well as their origins. Activism and the work of organizations and movements can be very influential. For half a century, the commitment of activists has put environmental issues on the political agenda, perhaps not enough, but indeed consistently and significantly. According to recent findings in neurobiology and many years of research in psychology and pedagogy, people are better suited for cooperation than for competition. Meta-studies show that cooperation is more efficient, and therefore more economical, than competition and increases well-being and mental health. In the Global South, the social or solidarity economy means, above all, a turning away from all forms of neo-colonialism and exploitation that are carried out by industrialized nations. In their case, solidarity economy also means setting aside any form of cultural imperialism in their quest for resources and appreciating the attunement with nature. Representatives of the Italian social cooperative Solco once explained the growth strategy of the social or solidarity economy as a strawberry seedling, which is a very illustrative way to present it to young people. When the plant is fully grown, it does not get bigger. Instead, it forms shoots, new plants which in turn form offshoots until the strawberry plants cover the whole hill. Social economy initiatives do not want to grow, but to multiply and spread their experience, knowledge and methods and, as a result, not to concentrate all infrastructure in cities but to distribute work and services more widely, better meeting local needs. As the engine of economic growth is the concentration of capital with the inherent need to increase profits, it is time to free companies from the pressure to grow. They should be replaced by alternative organizational forms, such as cooperatives or foundations that can sustain their activity, without unlimited growth and asset sharing. In Spain, for example, ecologistas en Action propose, as a solution to the crisis that we are already beginning to experience, to promote the development of a social, feminist and ecological economy, centered on the common good and not on the accumulation of monetary surplus value, which places the processes of sustainability of life at the center and guarantees social equity. As specific needed measures, they include the following. Implement wealth-sharing measures. Among others, redistributive and ecological taxation, which encourages sustainable ways of production and income distribution. Promote and support initiatives and projects aimed at fostering resilience and local self-sufficiency. Encourage economies in which people have autonomy and are not dependent on a salary. Influence the distribution of unpaid care work, associated in heteropatriarchal capitalism with women and femininity. Promote a proximity and circular economy, with short marketing circuits and oriented towards satisfying basic needs, under the criteria of the social and solidarity economy. Promote the decommodification of the provision of basic goods and services. Among other possible measures, reverse privatization processes and promote forms of community and public management. Implement a monetary system in which the money created is referenced to finite physical elements, the use of which does not generate interest. Support complementary economies, time banks, social currencies, barter, consumer groups, employment cooperatives, ethical finance, etc., based on cooperative, democratic, territorially anchored and non-profit models of association. At the same time, limit the action of the main actors of global capitalism, with measures such as a binding treaty on transnationals and human rights. Implement social and environmental clauses in public recruitment. Reform national accounting to include ecosystem services, material and energy consumption, Internalization of environmental and social costs, waste management, social welfare and care work. Fernando Prats also reminds us that both the social and the doughnut economy allow for a transition to the economic model with self-sufficiency options in basic sectors of the country. In fact, many doughnut economy initiatives are already flourishing and have been doing so since the formal economy went into crisis. These include, according to him, producer-consumer cooperatives, care-based cooperatives, community currencies, financial cooperatives, ethical banks, etc. The social economy is, therefore, already promoting a shift in the shared direction. Bringing together a heterogeneous group of social economy actors would help. Kothari highlights that housing and urbanism, alternative monetary systems, agroecology and food systems, climate justice, education or transport are among those thematic areas that the doughnut economy could unite with a common thread, a network of networks, beyond single-issue politics. In the face of globalization, eco-fascist radicalization and rampant climate change, it sometimes seems easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of growth. However, we may be in what the Italian thinker Antonio Gramsci called an interregnum. As the old status quo is dying and the new one is not yet born, social movements are transforming their structures, practices, and cultural message along the way. Why? Transition discourses are emerging right now with a special diversity and intensity, to the point of becoming a veritable field of transition studies. Interestingly, its preachers are not limited to academia. Actually, most are emerging within social movements and NGOs. We can also see the birth of transformative economies, so called in 2019 during the World Social Forum, new economic models and practices around the commons, minorities, agroecology and cooperativism, with the aim of transforming the existing economic system. Practical exercise. The thinking hat. Instructions. The thinking hat is a metaphor that represents different types of personalities and opinions that we encounter in teamwork. In this role play, the different personality types will be represented by a different color of hat. Divide participants into groups and give them a colored card, hat that they can keep in sight for others to see. The hats will be as follows. Orange hat. Informative, represents the facts and information available about the problem. What information is available and what are the facts to be considered? Yellow hat. Constructive, represents optimistic thinking about the problem and the search for a solution. What are the advantages of implementing the solution and why do we believe it is achievable? Black hat. Cautious, represents thinking about the problem cautiously and defensively. What are the possible risks? What can go wrong? Red hat. Intuitive, represents different emotions and reactions from emotions. How do you feel about this situation, a problem, a solution? Green hat. Creative, analyzes possible suggestions from a creative perspective. Blue hat. The leader, negotiates between different models and in handling the discussion, emphasizes responsibility for the joint solution found in time and takes care within the group. Once the cards have been distributed, either the people we facilitate or the leaders themselves, those with the blue hat have 1 minute to decide one topic related to environmental, social or economic issues they are interested in, worried about or want to explore. In the meantime, the rest of participants have some time to talk to each other and to other facilitators to understand their roles and functions correctly. The leaders share the topic with the group. In case the group has many people, several groups can be generated with more than one person per color a role. The groups have a limited amount of time to discuss the issue through the role and perspective, hat color they were given. At the end, the conclusions are presented. Participants are asked how they felt about their role and which role they would like to have the most. A change of hats is also possible. We emphasize the need to understand that different people understand and deal with problematic issues from different approaches, hats, and that it is important to understand and respect each other, practice active listening and try to reach a consensus.